Hello, everyone, from my side as well. So I'm Mari from Karma Ventures. We are early stage fund operating here in the Baltics, but actually investing across whole Europe in deep tech, mostly software startups. So very happy to be here and actually see that this session, Karma Academy, going on. Briefly about Karma Academy, it's initially, it was our internal event for our portfolio founders where we thought topics that maybe typically are not discussed one-to-one or in small groups. It would be good to have those sessions about sales, marketing, product, recruiting, and any topic that founders and CEOs that actually they are tackling. But here at the moment, I'm very happy to hand over to our third presenter, JB, who is a partner at 70 Ventures. It's an early stage investor in Lithuania. And JB is actually going to talk about sales. This is something that everybody coming from this region knows. This is a hard topic because, as you know, we are not naturally like marketing or sales-oriented people, or at least, from our background, many are not. But JB, actually, I read about you on your site something interesting, that you eat sauce for breakfast, B2B sales for lunch, and data for dinner, and you like it spicy. So that was something that just, captured me to hear more. So JB, please.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. Just to get the temperature in the room, who in the room here is in sales? So what is everyone else doing? Right, so quick intro about myself. I call myself JB, that stands for Jean-Baptiste, so I'm French. JB is much easier to pronounce and to remember. Quick intro, I've been in the B2B sales for the past 10 years. Actually, my first real job in B2B sales was for a French company, and I was in charge of developing north of Europe. So for a French company, north of Europe is everything above Belgium. That's when people stop speaking French, we call it North. I was 22 years old, and I was probably the most arrogant French person you have ever met. I was on the plane almost every single day of the week. I had my car, 2 assistants, and my office, and we were making big deals with all the biggest retailers in the north of Europe, so the Nordics, the UK, and so on and so forth. So, of course, I quit my job, I start my own startup, and I go successfully bankrupt in 11 months. I have debt for 8 years, and I go back to sales. And that's kind of when I joined the SaaS, B2B SaaS software world. I joined a startup in Denmark called Trustpilot. I was the 4th sales guy over there, and in less than 2 years, we scaled the sales team from 4 to 150 salespeople, from 50 to 5,000 customers, and I brought 600 customers myself. We had very generous commission system. I became debt-free. And then after that was almost 7 years ago, I moved to Lithuania. I worked with Praktika, the first VC in Lithuania, to invest in early stage, and my job was to basically help their startup to go to market. Eventually started a talent pool inside the portfolio to help the founders to get in front of customers. That team became a company. And then later I realized that doing consulting in B2B sales for early stage startup is a shitty business. So that's exactly why we launched 70 Ventures. So when we invest in companies, instead of sending them invoice and making the hardest part of the basically go to market, finding customers and so on, we invest in the companies, we help them to build sales team and go to market. And today what I want to share with you is basically some key lessons I learned from, I'm not sure if the slides are going to be on, yeah, some key lessons I learned from working with more than 60 sales team and 60 early stage companies. And the first lesson is actually a very bad news. In B2B sales, you are not in charge, right? So when I work with founders and when I work with early stage sales team, most of the time, the first thing I say is we need to stop saying we want, we do, we. It's not about us, it's about your customers. And the first thing we need to understand is how can you explain to your customers their problem in a better way they can? And if you can do this, they will automatically think you have the solution. And the way to basically achieve this is to put them in charge, and to put them in charge is to understand what they do, what are their KPIs, and what they're going to be basically measured on in their job if they run their own business, what they need to do to make sure that the business grows and doesn't go bankrupt. And to do this, we use a very, very simple framework. It's mostly really documenting your common sense about your customers and making some assumptions around it. And we structure it in 4 parts. So the first part is really about the company. it's really that simple. We have different kind of regions. We have verticals that are often oriented around business models, because according to business model, people will have different KPIs in these organizations. And then we have different data points to measure the size of the companies, which is usually related to how you price your product. So typically, if you sell an HR software or a solution for, let's say, marketing or sales team, you will use number of employees. But if you sell a tool, let's say, for e-commerce, what matters is the traffic on the website. So you will use Alexa ranking or SimilarWeb. If you sell a tool for web developers that do mobile apps, you only care about the number of downloads. That gives you a clue about the number of users. So these are really dumb data points that we use to do list building. And then the very important data points are around the ideal contacts. So this is where you need to go very deep on what are the KPIs that you can impact when you target decision makers. So typically, they are the most senior people in the organization. They will have very, very bottom line oriented kind of KPIs for the business. And then they will have influencers, like managers, that will have more, let's say, KPIs that ends on the tools, right? And according to who you target and according to the very proposition of your product, you need to understand what are the KPIs of this different persona. Even though, let's say, it's B2B sales, people are still buying your product for personal reason. They might have a good relationship with you at the end because you make their life easier, but if someone tells you that you need to build a relationship to sell your product, it's most of the time bullshit. Like at the beginning, people will buy stuff because you make their life easier at work. That's why they will buy it. And if you don't understand their KPIs and you keep talking about yourself and not about how it is difficult to achieve X, Y, Z problem in their organization, it's going to be very difficult to create meaningful conversation. So we go very deep on that part, on understanding who are the potential customers, and mainly target decision makers and influencers for a very simple reason. The champion that works for the influencers are very often young graduates in the organization, and they have very little influence from the bottom to the top, right? They are very keen on having meetings with everyone, but very little influence. So it's also toxic to target the champions. We map them because most of the time, who is reading your blog or going to your webinars are champions. So when they come as inbound leads, you want to make sure that you categorize them and have a process to, as soon as possible, bring influencer or decision maker in the process. Then we categorize the strengths of your value proposition into 3 categories. So we have a painkiller, a vitamin, and a plugin. So a painkiller is a product that you can simply build an ROI calculator where you will say, our solution will cost you 10,000 euro per year, and after 3 months, you generate already 10,000 euro of new profit. So you have a simple ROI calculator. This kind of product, because it impacts directly the bottom line of the business, you can target decision makers. And even though this will not, let's say, they will not be the person implementing the tool, as soon as they introduce you to the influencers that are the one hands-on with the product, you will have authority on them because you come from the decision maker. Most of the products, nevertheless, are vitamins, meaning that you can help to complete one task in 1 hour instead of 2 days, and you impact the productivity of the influencer. The decision maker will have no clue how the influencers are doing X, Y, Z task, and they will not care if you contact them. But for the influencer, this will be a huge impact on their productivity. And the good news is you have more influencer than decision makers, so it's completely normal that we have more vitamin and painkiller on the market. And then plugins are very difficult product to sell or to market with, let's say, proactive sales or outbound sales, simply because they don't really impact productivity or the bottom line of the business. And what we also map most of the time is the deal breakers. So for example, if you sell a hardware that needs a Wi-Fi to kind of functionate, it's very important to ask this question earlier in the process so you don't basically waste everyone's time. If you sell a cloud software, you don't want to have conversation with people that ask you how they can host it on their cloud if it's not possible. So this kind of deal breakers that we map early on and that we have in the conversation as soon as possible. And then switching costs is also extremely important. Many of the opportunities in the sales pipeline are lost because of switching costs. So typically people don't like change. I mean, I'm French, we go on strike for a living, right? Every time someone is talking about change. And it's the same in every organization. Even though, let's say, you sell a CRM system and the decision makers are the marketing and the sales director, you will have 20 salespeople that are using this sales system, like the CRM system every day. They are like the kings of the companies. Everybody's cheering them. They are bringing revenue. And if you need them to switch to another tool, and you don't talk about how you're going to be part of the solution, how you're going to onboard them into this new CRM, you are part of the problem. And then they will become your anti-champion, and the switching cost will be why you lost the deal. So also very important to have process around this for every different type of ICP. And then COVID came, right? So we had our perfect different kind of vertical, and we had to adapt our ICPs. So what we did is, if you work on different regions, according to how you were impacted with COVID and so on, we actually adjust which region we target according to lockdown and stuff like that. That might impact how your value proposition is actually relevant or not at that moment. Obviously, this is super obvious, like travel right now is not spending a lot on different kind of marketing tools and so on and so forth, right? So we try to avoid verticals that are impacted by COVID instead, unless you can be part of the solution. And also, we kind of moved away from SMBs and try to target more mature companies, unless, again, you can be part of the solution. What we did as well when it comes to persona is we basically looked at how we can help decision makers to adapt their KPIs when it comes to COVID, and only focus on ICPs where we could actually position our value proposition as a painkiller to make sure that, because it's less and less like this now, but I remember at the beginning, most of the budgets were frozen, and it was coming from the decision maker. So we tried to position every single value prop as a painkiller, and if possible, only focus on the ICPs where our value proposition was a painkiller, where we could basically talk directly to the decision maker. And this is just a different example to map your ICPs when you target enterprise. And we will share the slides after the workshop, and you can basically use the templates and the guidelines that we have if you want to map your ICPs. Then the second lesson that I've learned working with more than 60 companies is that actually sales teams are not for everyone, especially depending on where you position your product in this very simple matrix that we actually did not invent it, where you have the price and the complexity of your product. So typically, we always use ACV, which means annual contract value, to define the size of the contract, so how much your customer is paying you per year. It doesn't necessarily have to be SaaS. Just like sometimes you have software business where the customer repeat purchases and still have some kind of average annual contract value, so that could work as well. And then to us, TAM, total addressable market, doesn't mean how much, let's say, revenue or turnover you have in certain industries. For us, the total addressable market is how many organizations you can target in that market. So let's say if you are in the yellow category here, you are most likely a self-service software where you don't really need, the product is not complex, and your customer can self-serve themselves. Here, it might be very difficult to have, let's say, a return on investment on a sales team if you want to go after your customers. Most likely, also, it's a very mature market, and you have a lot of competition, and that's why the churn is a bit higher. Where we help companies to build sales team is, let's say, in the green category that we'll call SMB, and in the blue category that will be more towards enterprise. The total addressable market are a bit smaller, but still big enough to have a sales team that go after them and constantly recycle the market. And really, the main difference between from the top to the bottom is that for every single customers, we have a 12-month contract, if not more. So we have a billing frequency where we never charge monthly, and we get as much cash as possible upfront to pay the commissions for the sales team and have it scalable. And eventually, where you don't want to end up is in the graveyard, where your product is too complex and too cheap. So where we build sales team, again, is if you position yourself on the top, in the green categories or in the blue, of course, you have many companies that are in every categories, right? If you look at the big software companies, they are mastering every single piece. They have a self-service, a SMB, and enterprise solution, but usually you need to start from somewhere, right? So is there and the top and the bottom have two very different expertise. And typically what we see is you need to reach at least 100,000 MRR before to kind of expand into a self-service or more like hands-on sales tool. And the third lesson that I also learned working with so many salespeople, and just want maybe also to kind of ask you what you think the salespeople are the best at, but I was quite disappointing. So what do you think the salespeople are the best at? What? Try again. What? Empathy is very good. Yeah. Salespeople are the best at excuses. And I'm a salesperson myself, and it's actually true. Like, they have actually good reasons. If you look at the sales funnel, they need to do every single steps in that funnel to basically close one deal. And they will spend most of their time in the part of the funnel that doesn't add value. And then they will have this endless number of tasks, and eventually always have excuse that they didn't have time to call that lead, they didn't have time to book a meeting, they didn't have time to close that deal or follow up on that one, and they have really good reason to have excuses. And the solution we basically implemented is not something we invented, it's more and more popular across the B2B SaaS industries. It's basically a specialized sales team, where you can have 3 roles in your sales team, and every single role in the team has only 1 KPI. This way you remove the room for excuses. So what you do is you simply map your ideal customer profiles, as many as possible, and then you use some different ways to build databases, so either web scraping or buying databases or kind of putting those 2 together, and you get your first DOM list. Then once you have your DOM list, you have a person that is in charge of crunching that list and enriching only the ICP companies with the key contact. That person is called the lead research specialist and has only 1 KPI, is the number of leads enriched per week. Then you have another person in your team that is called the sales development rep, the SDR, that has only 1 KPI, which is to book meetings. And then eventually, the most senior person in the team, the account executive, has only 1 KPI, which is to close X number of deals that will return 3 times the cost of the sales team. And this is pretty much how we drive data-driven sales with a predictable revenue model. Every single person in the team has only 1 KPI. Every single person in the team has a target to reach. And this is also your, let's say, future talent ramping platform, because the lead research specialists are most of the time part-time students. As soon as they graduate, they can become sales development rep, and the sales development rep can become your first account executive if the founders are doing this part of the sales process at the beginning. And then, of course, what is very important and what every single early-stage sales team often tells me after, let's say, 1 to 2 years is we ran out of leads. We contacted everybody what to do, we ran out of leads. And as far as I know, the best reply rate I ever got in any kind of cold outreach campaign was around 76, 78. This is huge. But usually we are quite satisfied when we reach, let's say, 20% reply rate, meaning that 80% of the organization you are reaching don't reply to you. But this organization has still ideal customers. So having also a simple hygiene in your sales process that helps you to recycle those accounts will basically help you to never run out of leads. And what we realize is actually, especially in enterprise, from 8 to 12% of all your contacts in your CRM are actually losing accuracy every month. Meaning that these people are moving inside, outside of the organizations, and these companies are still very good, ideal customer company that you should constantly reactivate. So that's pretty much the essence of how we build the first steps, the first milestone, let's say, of a data-driven sales process, where you have 3 roles, each role has 1 KPI, and it's very simple impact on the stage of the funnel, where you have activities that needs to generate a certain impact on the funnel. And then the next lesson is that everything that you cannot automate everything, but we can systemize most of the part of the outbound sales funnels. And if we can systemize it, we can basically measure it. So when you look at outbound, which is system, and inbound that you can automate, the outbound system are always the same step. You need to find companies, you need to find people, then you need to do the outreach, book a meeting, and then during the meeting, that's when you discover if the pain that they have match your painkiller. On the other side of the funnel, if you are lucky, you will have the right people that come with the right pain that just need the right painkiller. Typically, when we go to market, we push with outbound. We have way more, let's say, we have way faster results and way better, let's say, feedback from the market when we do outbound, because unless, let's say, you're a public figure in the industry where you start your business, it's very unlikely that you will have any authority with your content, with your blog, with your webinar from day one. Of course, it's 100% compatible, but that's pretty much where we put efforts when we start B2B sales in the SMB and enterprise parts. And then the main idea as well with any system is to keep it lean, especially when you are early stage. You don't want to stay in the strategy phase where you don't talk to customers. So typically, what we want is to make assumptions that we can verify as fast and as cheap as possible, so in order to be able to tune what works and what doesn't work. And at the end, we want to be able to repeat what is working. And if you put this same lean framework on the specialized sales team model, you basically, as long as you are staying in that phase where you kind of try to think who are your best customers, what are the best way to build lists, and so on and so forth, try to automate that part, you are not verifying anything. It's a very dangerous space. Like, we find a lot of dead startups here, where everybody agrees with each other. We have a lot of meetings where we think we are super smart, but you're not talking to customers. As soon as you start reaching out to customers, you are starting to add value in your funnel, but also getting the most important feedback from the market. And in our understanding, there is only 3 reasons why you don't book meetings, which is the first step. right? And the 3 reasons are very simple. So it's either the quality of the list is poor, so either the companies or the people that you contact are not the right people in the, just not right matching your ICPs or whatever. And this typically you can see it with the kind of objections you get. The second reason is the outreach message that you have when you call or when you email or both. And typically you can see that they object in a completely different ways, or they basically don't get what you are talking about. And in a way, actually, it's never them, it's never your customers or your prospect not getting what you're talking about. It should be the other way around. It should be you don't get your customers. You should be able, again, to describe their problem better than they can. And the last point is, so we have the list, the outreach, and the last point is the timing. So obviously now we have COVID, that doesn't help. But eventually we can adjust according to the time, because sometimes you also have the holidays season that also impact the result. But these are the 3 reasons why you don't book meetings. So we, on a weekly basis, brutally ask ourselves when we go to market, why are we not booking meetings if we are not booking meetings? And if we are not able to book more, what are of the 3 reasons are the reason why we don't book meetings? So using this kind of very lean approach when we go to market. And then a simple way I will give you, we basically have trainings and templates for every single part of the sales funnel here. And one part of the system that I want to quickly share with you is how we basically enrich leads. It's very manual, it's a system, but that's also why we have very high quality reply rate afterwards. So we use different type of tools. I will share the slides, but the most important tool in that slide is the common sense, which everybody should have. So meaning that, for example, when you use different tools, they will give you a hint. They will give you, let's say, access to peer-to-peer database, and they will give you, let's say, ping verification on emails. But the most important part to have a quality database that you build for yourself is to use your common sense, to use people that follow guidelines, and everybody in the team is thinking the same way about who are the customers. Then for every single part of the process, we basically have flowcharts. Simply because when you specialize your sales team, you also want to make sure that everybody is on the same page about the steps of the processes, and that most of the time when we see people making mistakes, it's not because they have bad intention, it's because of bad process. So every time we see that there are some mistakes in some part of the process, we try to look at our flowcharts, at the guidelines that we build together with the flowchart, and understand in which part we actually had a misunderstanding, and try to always improve the process that will become later what we call your sales playbook. And to give you a first hint of what is data-driven sales, I'm just going to use the whiteboard. So every single CRM has those 3 objects where you have account, contact, and opportunities. They might be called different according to the CRMs that you use. But at the end, these 3 objects are basically what you have in the CRM. And object is just a fancy way to call it, to call big tables. And when you import, let's say, account from different database, you will have different data points, like size of the company. So let's say we have 3 different type of size. We have industry with 3 different type of industries, just for the sake of the examples. And let's say regions, ABCs. And then we have, let's say, task, according to every single steps of the process to measure the impact of the activities on the funnel. So let's say at the beginning, what we want is we want to pre-qualify those companies, and we assign 100 tasks from whatever source of database we got, and we basically check if the ICPs are, if the companies are ICP yes or no. So at the beginning, all of this field is empty in your CRM, and let's say when you complete your 100 tasks, for the sake of the example, we'll say it's 50-50. Then you can see that you got 50 ICP yes and 50 ICP no from this whatever database. And you can see that actually most of your ICPs are from that size, from these 2 industries, and only for that region. And the first way you can use data-driven source at the beginning when you just crunch database is that the next time I will assign 100 tasks to review 100 companies, instead of doing a bulk assignment, I will only assign those tasks to companies from that size, from those 2 industries, and from this region, and I should have more ICP companies. And then we can do this even further with every single object in the CRM later on in the process. So for example, we will be able to see that we actually book more meetings with decision makers that work with this or that expertise, with influencers that work with this or that expertise, that are linked to whatever XYZ companies. And we basically use this with the same amount of resources to achieve better results. So again, this is just a quick overview of how we use data-driven sales, but today it's just unfair the amount of data that you can have in your CRM to basically improve the productivity of your sales team without adding more resources. So going back to the slides, again, I will share the slides afterwards, and there is basically what we have here on the whiteboard in the slides. Then, of course, we are leaving the assume part, and we need to outreach your customers, right? And we need to find ways to book meetings with them. There is basically two main channels that you can use to outreach customers. Of course, we have LinkedIn as well, and I'm not going to touch LinkedIn, but mainly it's cold email and cold call. And there is this rumor that cold call is dead. It's definitely not dead. Like, people are still using cold call. People are still using phone as a channel, and then, of course, we have cold emails. So, of course, it's much better if you're a native speaker and if you target SMBs to have very effective, let's say, cold call outcome. And cold email is, let's say, sometimes easier for enterprise, but you can also still use cold call to map organizations when you are calling them. And the reality check, especially now that, like, in the past year, we have recruited and trained more than 150 SDRs that are booking meetings, and most of them are, let's say, a different generations than mine. The kind of realization I got is, actually, to talk to my first girlfriend, I had to call her parents' home. We didn't have mobile phone, right? I don't know who else in the room had to call the parents' home of the first girlfriend or boyfriend. Yeah, exactly. So I was comfortable with that channel. That's just normal. I had even gatekeeper when I was calling my first girlfriend to talk about our homework. And nowadays, the new generation, they just text each other. There is no more gate. There is just a text message. It's instant on whatever different channel. But the reality, and that might end up like the phone channel might disappear when this generation is making decision, maybe. But today, the reality check is I'm still making decision, and my first girlfriend parents are still making decision, and they are still comfortable with the phone as a channel. And most of the other people are just using email and LinkedIn, and nobody is calling those decision makers. So that's also the reality check. Call them. And then, of course, cold email is great. We're using it. We have a lot of success, and most of the time now anyway, we just do these multi-touch sequences. But what I want to share here is like a few best practices. So the first best practice, and it's that simple, when you do cold call, smile. It just makes you feel more confident. It's also much nicer when you talk to people that are smiling. And then, of course, we use, and we have scripts that we use when we practice, but never read a script when you talk. Actually, always think you are face-to-face. And imagine you go to see someone and you start reading a script, right? That just will be awkward, and it's the same. It's super awkward on the phone as well. Right? So don't use script. I remember having this great sales coach back in Denmark when we worked at Trustpilot, and she actually explained us that our center of gravity is here, and you naturally feel more confident when you stand. So if you can, just also stand, smile, and pick up the phone. Then often the mistake we do is we try to pitch the gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper is the receptionist, right? He or she thinks that she rules the companies. And actually, they do rule the company at that moment when you call. But their job is also to help you. Their job is also to pick up the phone and connect important people to important people. So the key message you have to give to the gatekeeper is that he or she will not be in trouble if he or connects you to important people. And also, no matter to who you talk, remember that they will remember only 20% of what you say. That's just how it is. 20% of what other people say when there is no visual or just a voice, they will remember 20%. So we have to use very little keywords that basically builds authority and helps them to understand that you are important. And then acknowledge that the gatekeeper is in charge. Like, very often, people are trying to bypass gatekeeper, but gatekeeper will just tell you that the other person is in a meeting or they're not available right now. And very often, the gatekeeper are also sitting at the reception desk of the company. So if you leave message to them, they will give it probably to the person who is going to pass in front of them every day. And this actually works. Leave message to the gatekeeper, and there is only 3 possible outcomes. They will give the message to the person, and this person will get back to you. They will not give the message, but next time you call back, they will feel like they owe you and really, really try to connect you. Or third option, they actually pretended they took a message, but you will call back and see that you are persistent. And then, of course, if you still suck at passing gatekeeper, that happens at the beginning, you can just call back after 6 p.m. They are usually home watching TV, especially if you are calling SMBs. So after 6 p.m., you can have your list of companies where you were blocked by gatekeeper. Typically, you have decision maker picking up the phone because they think it's potential customers, and they are less, let's say, regarded on filtering the calls to who you should be connected. Then everybody is embarrassed by silence. Silence is very embarrassing, right? We really don't like it. That makes us feel weird. But it also makes other people feel weird. So when we ask questions, very often we try to explain our question because we don't want to feel the silence. But the best thing you can do after asking a question, of course, it's important to explain why you're asking this question before you ask the question. But when you ask a question, shut up. And in less than 10 seconds, usually other people start to talk. So when we do those cold call training, it's actually very fun. I always have one piece of paper, and one slide is smile, and the other one, shut up. Smile, shut up, smile, shut up. And that's pretty much like the key rules of doing cold call. Then, of course, we don't want to sell in the first call. And actually, people can smell it. If you call to sell, if you call to book a meeting, they can smell it. It's disgusting. What you do is you are calling to see if there is a fit. You have done your research. You have checked that company. You have found this person on LinkedIn. You think that they have pain point X, Y, Z. You are really just calling to see if there is a potential fit. You are not selling anything. And you should not call with a pressure on yourself to sell or book a meeting. You should really call with deep empathy, I heard that in the room, to see if there is a potential fit. And then, very, very important as well to do it in a good way, but to challenge your prospect. The most common objection that you will get as soon as you reach a decision maker is, send me an email. I mean, I love working with the north of Europe. People are very, very direct here. But if you work with other markets, like let's say the French market or the UK market or whatever, people are a bit more polite. But what send me an email means is, please, can I please ignore you politely by email? That's exactly what it means. It's not like, please send me an email, I cannot wait to read it. That's definitely not what it means. But again, because you don't want to waste people's time, the best way you can handle this objection is like every objection, you can acknowledge it. Of course, I can send you an email. What is your email address? No, look, I don't want to waste your time. What would you like me to send by email? And again, you are not in charge, they are in charge, and now they are in charge of getting what they want by email. There is different ways that this can go, mainly 2 or 3 ways, and we can discuss it afterwards if this is interesting. But the main idea of the whole part of the sales process, and from the very beginning, is to put them in charge. Because you are not in charge, and you are not going to go in their mailbox, read your email, and reply to your own email. And then, of course, there are the same best practice that we can apply to cold emails and get results like this, where we reach, on average, with the sequence we do, that are, again, multi-touch points, we reach between 25 up to 70+ reply rate. That doesn't mean that every single replies are, of course, like positive, but there are also some best practices that you can use to get this kind of results. So the screenshot is quite small here, but what we have is 55, 48, and 47% reply rate. We never track the links, like how many people clicks on the links, for a very simple reason. The first reason is this can increase your chances to go to spam, so that's not going to help the reply rate. The second reason is we believe people are not stupid, and they can see when the link is tracked, and then it basically kills your whole efforts of building this perfect list. And the third reason is, actually, I just want people to click in one place, reply. So why to put links? But then to achieve this basically result, we have some best practice that we also use, which is the subject, right? So the subject, we need to keep it that simple, always. When we send email to each other, we don't put so much effort in the subject of our emails. And I mean, personally, I never put a cap letter for every single letter of the emails I send. So the subject should not be sellish, the subject should be very simple, and sometimes we might use camouflage techniques. What I mean by camouflage is, if you send an email to, let's say, a decision maker or influencers, and you say question about KPIs, and the KPI is like very specific, if it's a large organization, and your email is just first name, last name, not like JB from 70 Ventures, then they might think it's an internal email. But then again, it's not a trick, because I'm actually talking about that pain point in the email. So that's what we call camouflage kind of subject. But very, very important to not try to trick your subject or to sell in the email. Then, of course, the email has to be 7 lines or less. And the reality is that today your prospect will read your email on a vertical screen. So it has to fit on a mobile screen. Luckily, the mobile screens are getting bigger, but you are just one swipe away of being archived. That's just the reality. And the most important part of any cold emails is to basically read it out loud to each other. It has to feel like a conversation. And when you read it out loud to each other, you will see that very often when we write emails, we make much longer sentences because we don't need to breathe in between when we type to finish our sentences. But when we talk, we make much shorter sentences because we need to breathe. And typically, when I talk to people, and that's a role play we do, like let's say we're in a conference like this, I meet my ideal prospect at the coffee stand. I know how he or she looks like because I saw her on LinkedIn. And then I need to read my email, and it has to feel like a natural conversation. And if it doesn't, it's a bad email. And typically, you will see or maybe notice when you talk to each other in the conference, we don't use bullet points and we don't attach PDF. So it's the same with the cold emails, at least the first one. And then we have this kind of checklist that we use to make sure that we kind of touch and build a conversation that is relevant for them. So we always have homework that are related to an assumption about their pain. Then we put our painkiller together with a social proof. If possible, we talk about our secret sauce, so how we are different from our competitors, and have a call to action at the end of the email. And the call to action always needs to be a question that they can reply by yes or no. Because if you draft these super very nice cold emails, and I ask you at the end, what do you think? What do I think is I'm in between two meetings and I'm reading your email on my phone, right? But do you think this could be of interest for your team? It's easy for me to say yes or no. And the only reason I will have two call to action, so two questions in one email, is when I want to look for a referral. So yes, please talk to Jimmy, right? So that's the only reason I will have two call to action. Again, I will share the slides, and here's a simple emails that is very short that we use with the companies and got like 18% reply rate with just one email. I really don't recommend that you copy that one, because it's just every single email is kind of, let's say, drafted around different personas and so on and so forth. And for example, we don't contact marketers the same way we contact CTOs for very different reasons, right? But just to walk you through the logic here, we actually added this one afterwards because the persona we were contacting were introvert, and they were not objecting about what we were talking about. They were objecting that we contact them, that we enter their space. So as soon as we added, I hope you don't mind the direct approach, they were actually way more chill about this whole approach. And use the different best practices. I'm kind of speeding up because I can see we have 8 minutes left, but I will share the slides afterwards. One thing that we really like playing with right now is, I don't know if some of you use Gmail, and if you notice that now Gmail also suggests replies to emails. So we actually send emails to ourselves, and we try to trigger Gmail AI to see if Gmail thinks it's a good idea for us to talk. And what we realize is that actually Gmail hates call. As soon as you use the word call in your cold email, all the suggested replies are not interested. So the AI probably figured that every salespeople that suggest a call gets negative replies, so automatically they suggest negative replies. So we don't mention call anymore in cold emails. So small stuff like this that are fun to play around. This is kind of how we adapted what I was talking about, so the homework, assumption and painkiller, social proof, and secret sauce with COVID. So basically, the difference is that now we try to give away something by default when we reach out, if we can be part of the solution again in industries that are affected by COVID. We also do an extra mile together with the social proof. So together with the giveaway, we show how we have helped our customer during COVID. And as a social proof, not only before COVID, because the way some companies are running business is different nowadays. And then before that, the call to action was very direct, like kind of depending on which persona you target, so suggesting that we should have a conversation. And now we do it much softer, where we want to get first approval and then kind of move to a conversation. Our campaign back in the days used to be multi-touch point up to 40 days, and then after COVID, we basically moved it to 14 days, because to be honest, I have no clue what's going to happen in 14 days in XYZ market, and we need to stay even more flexible on how we change. And as you can see, we mix different touch points, because the most important when you do outreach is to find the channel that create this sense of urgency for the person that you reach. And yeah, so different reality check over there, but for example, we saw that people spend more time on social medias. So we send actually LinkedIn invite with a short message together with the first email, and then we start calling afterwards. So different kind of realization that we had, and we measure pretty much everything that we can systemize. Again, I will share the slides afterwards, and you have some templates that you can use to kind of also draft your campaign. When we use this document, we basically draft every single touch point one after another, and because it's a compact table, you actually draft your email in a vertical format from the first basically moment that you start doing your outreach. So that kind of helps you as well to see how your email is going to look like on a vertical screen. We systemize pretty much everything that is related to the cold outreach. So in this template and this document, you will see that there is actually only 9 ways people interact with cold outreach. 9 ways. So if there is 9 ways they will reply to your cold outreach, no matter if it's the phone, LinkedIn, postcard, call, whatever, there is 9 ways you can handle it, and there is 9 ways you can systemize it, and there is 9 ways you can systemize or you measure the outcome of the objections or the positive way or negative ways they basically reply to you. Then we also have GDPR, and I'm going to skip that part because it's going to be on the slides. But basically, there is two things that matters when it comes to GDPRs, is that you basically process the personal data of people and you put it in your CRM, and of course they did not give you their consent. So what you want is to have this custom field in the CRM on the contact object where you document what type of data you put in the CRM and where you found it. And when you contact them, if you want to be compliant with the GDPR, you need to have a disclaimer like this that kind of tell them what kind of personal data you used with what legitimate interest, which is direct marketing, and what are their rights according to the GDPR for their, regarding their data. So again, I will share the slides, and there is some guidelines and templates that you can use to kind of be compliant as well with your outreach when it comes to GDPR. But that's not, I think, a part that we want to spend so much time on today. The long story short about GDPR is that you have a legitimate interest to contact anyone and to process their data if they match your ideal customer profile. But then again, it doesn't mean they don't have rights when it comes to their data. But that's also a new thing we have added to the process. And then the final thing I want to share with you is when we do the demo call, we follow this best practice as well. So like I said, when you call someone, they will just hear you, so they will remember 20% of what you say. And every single salespeople can achieve to have 50% a conversation where people remember 50% of what they say, even if they are terrible and they have this very narcissistic approach of having sales. But what we want to achieve with every single conversation, let's say, we have with customers, is to create a discussion. And also when we do software demo, if possible, I will never share my screen. I will ask them to share their screen. I will show them their demo account or a dummy demo account where they can have this personal experience, where I bring them to La La Land on where all their pain points are basically solved, blah, 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 and they have this demo software in their hand. And after the demo, if you did that well and you had a proper discovery, then they will basically show it to their colleagues. Look, I had such a great call. This is what we did. This is the demo account that we set up together. And they will start teaching their colleagues. And that's really what we have when we basically train salespeople to do demo calls in mind to make sure that we follow the best practices. In the slides, you will also get this kind of framework on how that we use when we basically do the customer presentation. And everything here in that framework is made to put the people in charge of basically how they're going to agree about the agenda of the meetings, how they're going to agree about having a conversation that will be about them, having this demo experience that I talk about. And the most important part is the next step. They will have to suggest the next step. They will have to talk and ask about the price. So again, you will have also access to how to present and build presentation around that structure, and then of course some templates to be able to practice yourself, to do role play on this framework. And if you understood correctly where we are today, so basically this part as well can be measured and systemized, because we can put scoring on every single part of the meetings. There is 4 parts, and have this habit, which is of course 100% bias, but having salespeople, founders, every single one involved with customer presentation to basically score their meetings and be able to basically score ourselves in the same criteria for the 4 part of the demo calls. And then, of course, what is important is to measure on a weekly basis every single activities of the of the sales funnel and measure the impact of the activities. So it's very, very easy to have your sales team busy, but we never know sometimes if we are busy on doing the activities that are generating the right impact on the funnel. So if you use this approach where we freeze the funnel every week, we could see that, for example, here we are focusing on the first ICP, and the outcome is that we can find contacts, we can book demo, but we are never able to repeat it. So as soon as we switch to a new ICP, we can see that we're able to repeat the demo, but not the way we close deals. But learning from our conversation with the customers, we basically realize that we need to tweak the ICP that we approach, and then are able to basically repeat our success. And there is 2 ways to look at the funnel. So of course, we can look at how do we increase the conversion from the top to the bottom. But we can also use, like we realize here, we can leverage data to also, with the same amount of resources, improve the productivity on how we go to market. We will always, if possible, leverage data over opinions, because that's just way clever way to go to market, right? Usually, if you listen to opinions, the person with the loudest voice in the room or the most gray hair will be the opinions we follow. But when we follow data, we usually have way more, let's say, success at repeating our success, right? At repeating what works. And then, of course, when it comes to repeating, what you want to achieve is to be able to forecast this kind of impact on your funnel. If you had 100 ICPs, you will get 14 meetings, 12 offers, and close 5 deals. And this is pretty much the same way to look at the sales funnel. So when you push the data at the beginning, it's very dumb data. And what you want to be able to repeat is to reverse engineer every single step of the funnel at first to basically improve the productivity. And we are running out of time, so I will just stop here. The last, basically, lesson that I learned is we have mapped these 7 principles that we use when we recruit salespeople. So someone mentioned empathy. That's actually very good. We actually test empathy when we recruit salespeople in sales interview, and we basically have our checklist where we need to see the 4 first values here when we basically recruit them and hire them and before the training. So that was the 6th lesson I wanted to share with you. Thank you for listening. I don't know if we have time for questions.
We have 1, maximum 2 questions. If you have questions, we have also a Slido opportunity. And we have one from Slido, and we have the Slido here. Yep. What part of the sales funnel could be outsourced to AI?
Okay, it's a very good question. I think this part, to be honest, because there is tons of data here, and especially when, and there is a few startups, and I've talked to a few startups in that space. We do all of this manually, but if you put AI on this, then you will be able to see much faster with, let's say, less human factors, what kind of companies are better at, engaging and moving down the funnel on XYZ, how many activities you need to have, and so on and so forth. But there is so many other layers of data that AI cannot get yet, and I'm not sure AI will ever get that part when it comes to the human interaction, that I think it's a bit difficult to predict that AI will, at some point, replace salespeople.
Thank you. Do you have one more?
Yep.
Go ahead. Sorry?
Where to download the slides? Yeah, you need to go to 70ventures.com/lat59 2020.
So all these slides can be
right there.
found from there. So thank you, JB.
Thank you.
Very thorough, very hands-on presentation. Thank you.